Hello students, this is the introductory video where we will show you all basic calculator functions. This calculator is a TI-84 Plus from Texas Instruments, and you'll be using it all throughout high school, so knowing the functions is very important for the upcoming years. The top row of buttons is purely for graphing functions and equations. The y equals button is what you'll first click to type in the function you want to graph. From there you can type in a function and click the graph button. Here's an example of a function typed into the y equals section. Once you have your graph, the three middle buttons can be used on the top row. The window button is where you can adjust how much of the graph you want to see down to the specific numbers. The zoom button contains preset window settings, and the trace button is used to scroll along the graph to find a second point. The second and alpha buttons introduce a whole new set of buttons when you press it. If you press either in combination with other buttons, it opens up a whole new set of functions that you can use. The mode button has many functions, but the primary function in math curriculum is to switch between degree and radian mode. You won't need to switch to radians until grade 12 trigonometry, but it'll be very important then. Above mode is the quit button, which used in combination with the second button will quit you out of any program that you're in. Next to this is the delete and insert button. If you use arrow keys to scroll through an equation, you can delete and insert numbers like so. This can also be used to insert brackets if you mess up your equation. These are some of the most useful buttons for basic calculator use because it saves a lot of time instead of completely clearing and restarting your equation. The arrow keys are used to scroll through functions or lines on a graph in order to find a number or change something in a function. In a graph, you will need to use these to find specific points. The x, t, theta, n button is used to represent a variable in an equation. You can click the alpha button and the green X button, but clicking X is much faster. X is the unknown in an equation, and you will need to use this all throughout high school, so it is important to become familiar with this button. The next important button is the math button. The math button gives access to a whole array of other functions, such as turning decimals into fractions, cubing, cube rooting, and nth rooting. In the number section is where you will do absolute values, and that's pretty much the only function that you will need in this section. If you scroll over two more to the right, there's the probability section where you'll find permutations, combinations, and factorials, which will be very important in Math 30. Above the math button, if you click second, is where you will restrict domain. The clear button is what you will use to clear any function. You won't need to use the x to the exponent of -1 button because in calculus you'll be writing it out algebraically. The next three buttons are used for trigonometry. This is where switching from degree and radian mode will be important. Depending on the level of trigonometry, you will need to switch between them because it changes your answer when you use the sine, cos, and tan buttons. Above them are the inverses when you click second and either sine, cos, or tan to activate it. The exponent button is for doing higher exponents than a number squared. When you are using this button in a function, make sure that you use brackets after the exponent to separate it from the numbers that follow it. Above the exponent button is pi. Pi is the number 3.1415, so on and so on, which you will need for calculating problems like volume, circumference, and grade 12 level trigonometry. The x squared and the square root button above it are beneficial to become comfortable with throughout all levels of math. Pushing the square button after a number or variable will square that number. The square root button will put the root of any number you put inside of it. The only exclusion for this is negative numbers because you will get a syntax error. You will need to use the comma button in advanced calculus but nowhere else in this curriculum. These are the two bracket buttons which you will use to separate numbers and variables in order to manipulate them. These will be your best friends in math, and becoming comfortable with them and using them a lot will be very helpful. The log button is for Math 30 in grade 12. Ln and e to the x are types of logs, and you will also use them in calculus. The e button above the division sign is also for calculus, and if you click enter, it is a number. On your calculator, there are 10 numbers and 5 buttons for dividing, multiplying, subtracting, adding, and entering equations. Beside the 0, there is a decimal button, and beside that is a negative button. Be sure not to confuse the negative button with the subtraction button, because if you do, your equation will end up in a syntax error. The subtraction button is for when you are subtracting two numbers, and the negative button is for when the number that you are entering in your equation is negative. Above the negative sign is the answer sign. This is for when you want to put an answer from your last equation into your new equation. For older calculators, this will be important, but for newer ones, you can just scroll up to the new equation above and copy it. In the bottom left corner is the on and the off button. If you want to save your battery just a little bit longer before charging it, turn your calculator off after every use. Thank you all for tuning in and learning more about your calculator.